Hi, today we're going to be going over the Java solution for Leetcode 695. Max area of islands. You're given an m by x binary matrix grid. An island is a group of ones representing land connected four directionally, so horizontally and vertically. You may assume all four edges of the grid are surrounded by water. The area of an island is the number of cells with a value of 1 in the island. Return the maximum area of the island in the grid. If there are no islands, return 0. So we're going to be given a integer grid like this, and it's going to have just ones and zeros. So if you basically draw this out with the rows and columns, it should look something like this, and they've color coded it. The ones are lands and the zeros are water, and basically we just have to find what is the maximum area of any of these islands. So we can see that this has an area of 1, this has an area of 4, this has an area of 5, this has a 4, this has a 5, and then this has a 6. And notice how these two aren't connected, they're only connected in 4 directions. So we would return 6, yep, there it is right there. So the answer is not 11 because the island must connect 4 directions. Yeah, so that's what I said. And yeah, here this is just basically an empty grid, zero, all water. So there's no island. They're gonna return 0. This is gonna be another breadth first search sort of problem. And the idea here is that we're gonna basically loop through, look through the array, and then whenever we see of 1, we're gonna perform breadth first search. And during that, we're just gonna look in the 4 directions around it, and then see is this a valid cell, and it's a valid cell if it's number 1 in the array, so it's not outside of it, and number 2 if it is a piece of land. And basically we're just going to increment our local counter for the area of the island, and then we're at the end we're going to compare it to our global maximum, which is going to keep track of what is the maximum area we have found so far. So we're going to look through it. So we're going to look through it, and we're going to see this. We're going to see it's a 1. We perform breadth first search. We see none of the cells around it are valid. And then we have an area of 1. Then we'll move back, move past to this one. We're going to perform breadth first search. We see that the only valid one is down. Then we're going to go left, and we add up the total. We get 4. Another thing we're going to do is that whenever we basically go through a cell and check on it and increment our global area, not global, and increment our local sort of area of the island, we're gonna either turn that island into a 0, or we could have another array that tells us if we have visited it. So why is that important? Well, that way, like if we perform breadth first search and go down, this will cast in all 4 directions, and it'll see that the top one and right one are valid. So it's gonna perform breadth first search on the top one, which is then gonna do on the bottom, and it's gonna basically be an infinite loop looking up and down and up and down. And so that's not gonna get us the true area of the island. So we can basically get past that if we turn it into an invalid cell, so turning it into a 0 or any other letter than a so so we can get past that by turning it into an invalid cell, or we could just keep track of which ones we've visited. So you could try either one. I'm just gonna basically turn it into 0. It's way quicker and easier in my opinion, and that's basically the whole idea and implementation. So let's go through it. So we're gonna int max. This is gonna represent our maximum value, and we know for sure like there's at least gonna be a 0. We don't have to set an integer.min value, since if it's all zeros we could just return 0, and this is the value we're gonna be returning, so we could just return max. Next we're gonna have our local counter or area counter. So the reason why it has an array is because I tried this with an integer. It didn't work. I don't know the intricacies of Java that much to where why the integers, when we pass it through our breadth first search method, why it won't increment it. But I did find that it works fine if we just had an array of size 1, and then we can just increment that instead. So if any of you guys know in the comments, let me know why that doesn't really work, or I could just read upon it and then put it in the pinned comment or description. So anyway, then we're going to loop through the whole thing. So I is less than grid dot length, so this would represent rows, and then our j will represent the columns. Grid 0 dot length j plus plus, j plus plus, And now, if we find that a grid of I and j is equal to 1, then we can enact our whole thing. So, first we can perform breadth first search, and then we're going to have to pass in our coordinates I and j, the grid itself, and our count. Next, basically, if we have performed breadth first search and we figured everything out, we figured out the count, we're incremented and everything like that, then we want to compare it with our maximum value. So our maximum value is going to be the maximum between what it already is or our count, the area we just found with this breadth first search. And then after that, we need to make sure to set the count back to 0, since we don't want it to keep building on. We don't want to check this. We see it's 1, then we go here, then we do 2, 3, 4, 5. No, we just want this to be 4, so we'll just reset it back to 0 for the next island we'll find. And that's basically all we have to do, and now we just have to basically start the breadth first search method. So public void BFS, and it's going to take in the coordinates of I, j, the integer grid, and an int count. And now, first, with any of these types of methods, like breadth first search or depth first search, we're gonna do a boundary check. Just number one, check if a cell is valid by making sure, you know, it's a 1 and it's not outside the array. So if I is less than 0, or j is less than 0, that's not 0, there we go, or I is greater than or equal to grid.length, or j is greater than or equal to grid of 0.length, or, you know, grid of I and j is not equal to 1, since that's 1, since that's the only one we care about. If that's the case, we could just return. Else, number 1, we can increment our counter, so counter of 0, so plus that. And then number 2, what we have to do is that we have to turn it into an invalid cell. So I could just do grid of I and j is equal to 0. So now I turned it into water. And now we just recursively call BFS in all 9, or all 4 directions. So I, j, grid, and count. And then I'll just do this. Let me format this. Oops. There we go. And now, basically, the top, bottom, this would be right, and then this would be left. So, let's see if it works. Okay, great. And now let's submit it. Alright, great. So that was max area of islands.